So forest and wood products assets for climate change mitigation, prospects for maximizing their effects. I'd like to acknowledge first my co-authors, Estelle, Vial, and Claire Gourdet. They're both in our institute in FCBA, and they provided quite a lot of information data for this presentation. I will go through 6 points in this presentation. Just make sure that we share the same understanding of terms in the first one about these effects, climate change mitigation effects. We'll give you, we'll discuss a little bit about the carbon sinks of managed forest and harvested wood products. Then we talk about substitution effects, both material and energy. And I'd like then to discuss a little bit the possibilities of supporting these effects through policies and instruments like that, and taking the example of recent French policies, which might be of interest to discuss with you. Then I will have a little focus on one specific methodological choice, which is quite important, and to support these incentive policies for the use of wood products. And I'll conclude with the what I think are the challenges for optimizing the effects of the whole system, forest and wood products together. So first, let's have a word about, let's share a little bit about these definitions on what we're talking about when we talk about these effects for climate change mitigation. We first have sequestration and storage of carbon. And these are the very strong assets of the forest and wood products. Forest ecosystems use photosynthesis to uptake carbon in the form of CO2 from the atmosphere. They store it, and they store it for decades and centuries, and they release oxygen during this process. Of course, nothing quite new for you, I guess. But we have to consider also that the use of wood products is durably extending this carbon storage, and that's an important asset also. And we have somehow a pool of wood products, a pool of carbon in this wood products market, where when this pool is extended, this pool becomes a carbon sink. So these are two first S's, sequestration and storage. And then we have very strong effects to get also material and energy substitution. As far as material substitution is concerned, the principle is that by replacing carbon-intensive materials, the use of wood products avoids the greenhouse gases emissions associated with these materials like concrete, steel, and plastics, and so on. And there is another aspect, is the energy substitution. Fuel wood, produced in association with the production of wood material also replaces the use of fossil fuels, and therefore it avoids fossil carbon emissions. So we have here these 4 effects, which are the assets we can use for climate change mitigation. Let's now share a few figures. Few figures about the forest and wood products carbon sink. According to UNFCCC, global forest vegetation stores about 638 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. Of course, it stores carbon, but this is equivalent to CO2, to this amount of CO2 in biomass, dead wood, and soil. So of course that's a huge pool of carbon, and but it is not a very quiet one. Things happen to this carbon pool, and we have land use changes, we have clearings and degradation of forests, which are sources, of course, of greenhouse gases, which do limit or go in the opposite way of the carbon uptake of standing and regrowing forests. But still, the balance is very positive, and it is estimated that world forests provide a carbon sink of about 7.6 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. And that is a mean value over the last 20 years. And it should be compared to a general figure that we have, that the anthropogenic CO2 emissions worldwide are about 50 gigatons. So it is very significant, it is certainly altogether with the old biomass, it's about the second carbon sink after oceans. So that's for the general figure. So we have an idea of about 15% of the total emissions that are compensated somehow by the forests. Um, as far as the we have another figures which is about these carbon stock changes or carbon sink of harvested wood products, this pool of harvested wood products, which is increasing every year globally. And the information I found is that it's about 10% of net carbon stock changes in forest land pools in Annex 1 countries. Which are these Annex? What are these Annex 1 countries? It's the countries signatories of the Kyoto Protocol. So 10%, that's a good figure, but that's probably, as we will see, a high estimate, at least for European countries. In Europe, Eurostat gives figures also for forests, a bit more than 400 million tons of CO2 sequestered every year, or that is the carbon sink of forests. And that is also about 10%. It is estimated to be about 10% of Europe's greenhouse gases emissions in 2017, excluding land use and land use changes in forestry. So mostly industrial and economic, general economics emissions related. Harvested wood products in Europe, they are about 40, let's say 38.2, about 40. So we see that we are more or less in this order of magnitude of 10% with this harvested wood product carbon sink compared to the forest carbon sink. If we have a look now to the French situation, just to go a bit more in details, because of course I know a little bit more about these figures in France. Metropolitan forest, that is to say, excluding mostly Guyana forest, do represent a carbon stock which is over 9.5 gigatons of CO2. And the annual carbon sequestration is estimated to 83 million tons, which is corresponding to 18% of France's greenhouse gases emissions in 2017. Once again, this is a mean value over the years 2010 and 2015. And at the same time, when you discount harvest and mortality, the forest carbon sink in these years is about 52 million tons CO2 equivalent per year. It has to be mentioned that this sink has been continuously increasing since 1990, and it gained 80% from 1990 to 2017. Sorry. So we here have a very important asset for climate change mitigation, of course. Harvested wood products, the stock is of course more modest than the carbon stock in the forest, 300 million tons, and the carbon sink, as you see, is about 5% of the forest carbon sink. So it is not in the same range, of course, but we will see what we can do with that afterwards. Some attention points about these sinks and these pools. As far as forest is concerned, what is very positive is EU and French forests show a positive growth dynamic with an important biomass stock increase every year. We have 45% of balance, positive balance for the biomass stock in France every year. We have 37% in Europe, and that is a result, of course, of regulated sustainable management in these countries. Maybe the more challenging or negative thing is the climate change related risks: storms, fires, drought, biotic factors. Biotic factors we're experiencing very strongly in France and Germany these years with the scolite attacks. on spruce, they may impact strongly the carbon balance, and we have difficulties to modelize and to foresee what is happening there. So the quite obvious conclusion is climate change adaptation of forest is vital, and forest management policies are of most importance to the dynamics of this carbon sink. Concerning harvested wood products, you should know that the development of this pool depends strongly on the market economic dynamics, on wood market development policies, and we will come to that on the French example, and on wood products end of life management, because this is a pool. There are wood products entering this pool every year on the market, and there are wood products leaving this pool or outing this pool every year by waste disposal. So that if we act on reuse and recycling, we will increase this wood products pool. Let's come now to substitution. I'd like to make a small focus on these effects. Material substitution, this is the amount of gases emissions of fossil origin avoided by using a wood product instead of an alternative product with a more intensive carbon footprint. So every time we replace concrete construction by wood construction, we avoid carbon fossil emissions. This is due to the limited amount of mechanical energy for wood products manufacturing. It's also due to the good compromise that wood products present between lightweight and mechanical resistance, which limit the mass of the product, limits the impact of transportation and installation, therefore. Some figures about that. Substitution and material substitution is European mean values. We participated in the project a few years ago, which gave values between 1.5 to 3.5 tons of CO2 saved per ton of wood products used. And we calculated more recently and more precisely maybe French values for that. 1.52 tons of CO2 per cubic meter of wood used. That is the mean value for the French market and French situation. Of course, it's very variable from 1 to 10 times, considering the different kinds of wood products, because as you see, non-load bearing partition is 10 times less than a wooden windows in terms of substitution factor. But the estimate, we can then with these factors, we can estimate the total material substitution effect in France of the wood products on the market, and that is about 20 million tons of CO2 saved every year by the use of wood products. Energy is on the energy market. There's about the same situation, of course, when we substitute fossil energy by wood fuel, wood energy. We save emissions, and fuel wood is compared to reference energy resources or thermal reference energy resources of fossil origin like gas, oil, and coal. And the figures here are a little bit less than for material substitution. It's 0.5 tons of CO2 per cubic meter of wood fuel used, compared to a mix of 80% of fuel oil and 20% natural gas. Because in France, of course, the main use of wood energy is thermic production. As a total impact on the French energy market, we estimate that we have an emission avoided of about 12 million tons CO2 equivalent per year, and that is equivalent to 3% of France's total greenhouse gases emissions. And the total substitution effect when you add material and energy is about 8% of France's greenhouse gases emissions. So once again, it is significant and important. I should stress here that there are two things important with these substitution effects. The first one is that some experts question the way of calculating this substitution effect, because in general we have this total effect, which is the comparison of the use of wood with a reference scenario where wood would not be used. And if we have this absolute total effect, that's what we calculated here. We have 32.3 million tons of CO2 equivalent. But some other experts do consider that in accounting, only the reference scenario should take into account what is already on the market, what is already the practice of the economy, and then only additional use of wood should be considered. So this is somehow a political point of view that should be kept in mind, and it is applicable also to the forest carbon sink, where accounting systems do consider reference scenarios and the additionality of measures to be taken into account only. The other point on the other side is that these substitution effects, they are immediate and not reversible. Every tons that is saved, every ton of CO2 emissions which is avoided is definitely avoided. So that's an important effect maybe sometimes in opposition with what we can expect from the forest carbon sink, which is, as we've said, a little bit more uncertain because of climate risks. We come now to French policies as an example of what can be done in order to support these forest and wood products roles in climate change mitigation. And I'd like to give you this quotation from an IPCC paper recently, saying, for the long term, a sustainable forest management strategy aimed at maintaining or increasing the carbon stock in the forests while supplying the wood industry in all its uses at a sustainable harvest level will generate the maximum mitigation benefits. So that sentence probably inspired the experts who worked on the forest and forest products question in the French low carbon national strategy 3 years ago. What is this strategy? It's a document paving the way to carbon neutrality in 2050 for the French economy. Carbon neutrality, which should be achieved by balancing the emissions, the sources, and the sinks for greenhouse gases in France at the 2050 horizon. And this strategy has been looking to orientations and possible pathways for the different sectors of the economy in France. There are therefore orientations for the forest wood sector, and the idea there is to maximize carbon sinks, sequestration in soils, in forests, and wood products. And when you read carefully this document, what comes out is that the idea is to maintain the forest carbon sink. It's not to increase it, it's to maintain it, because somehow it looks like it is in its importance, which is very very large still. There is a thread that it could decline a little bit. So maintaining the forest carbon sink, and then maximizing carbon storage in wood products and their use for long-term uses such as construction, where the strategy says it should be market share should be multiplied by 3 until 2050, developing recycling and energy recovery from end-of-life wastewood. It also sets the objective of carbon neutrality of the construction sector. And there, the idea is to promote construction and renovation and equipment products with a lower carbon footprint, and namely bio-based, and also to decarbonize the energy mix used in this sector. So when these orientations are implemented into, translated into policy implementation, we have first forest management actions, and we have a Forest and Wood National Plan, among the objectives of this plan, we find an increase of the wood harvest in France while ensuring the forest renewal, of course. And this is very ambitious because it says 30% increase of the wood harvest from 2015 to 2026. So that is quite an ambition. And of course, this plan also wants to combine mitigation of climate change and adaptation to climate change. And it should be noted is that among the operational actions that it includes, there is a large share to risk management policy. I think its time is running out, so I will go quickly through these, just mentioning that there are interesting tools that are emerging for forest development and management, territorial plans for climate, air, and energy, which can be are declined at are sorry implemented at territorial level, local communities, regions, and so on with interesting quantification tools that I mentioned here. And also I'd like to mention the low carbon label bas carbone, which is a system for certification of forest projects, development and improvement of forest management, and which allows valorization, economic valorization through voluntary CO2 emissions compensation. That is also an interesting aspect managed by the ministry in charge of ecology. But maybe a little bit more time on wood products development actions. In accordance with the low carbon strategy allow on housing from 2018, sets the principle of a new regulation for new buildings that is named RE 2020 for regulation, réglementation environnementale du bâtiment, requesting to consider the environmental impacts of a building over its entire life cycle in order to promote the use of materials emitting less greenhouse gases or allowing carbon storage. So that's a very important principle, and also to promote the use of energy from carbon-free sources. This upcoming regulation is still not published, but the government has already announced that it will strongly support the development of the use of wood. And that will be done through two ways. First, the carbon footprint of buildings, and more specifically, the carbon footprint of the construction phase of buildings, depending mainly on materials, which should be lowered by 30% within 10 years. So this limitation to a low threshold of carbon is a clear advantage for low carbon intensive products. So a clear advantage for wood. The introduction also, and I'd like to spend two minutes on that, of dynamic life cycle assessment for the calculation of this carbon footprint, which gives a strong benefit to carbon containing or carbon storing materials. So that's the important item here. And just to come, if I still have 5 minutes, Dr. Deglise, just to come to a short explanation about what is this dynamic LCA and how it is an important step forward for our material. Conventional static LCA is a method where all greenhouse gases fluxes have the same impact on the global warming potential indicator, whatever the date they happen, even if this global warming potential is calculated over a period of 100 years. That is a conventional way of calculating the global warming effect. There is no time consideration in the inventory of fluxes. That means that 1 ton of CO2 emitted today has the same impact on the global warming potential result as 1 ton emitted in 2121. What static LCA means for the carbon footprint of 1 cubic meter of wood product is that we have minus 1 ton of CO2 emission at production time, and there is this negative value is the effect of sequestration during tree growth, sequestration of carbon. And we have plus 1 ton emission at the end of life of the product. That is conventional, whatever you do with the product. So you see that this, as far as biogenic carbon of wood is concerned, it is neutral in terms of effect on the global warming, considering the whole life cycle. And you add to that all fossil carbon CO2 emissions or CO2 emissions during its life cycle. So that is the conventional way of calculating the LCA of a 1 cubic meter wood product. Now, if we come to dynamic LCA, the innovation with this method is to consider the date of emission. And the delayed emissions have less global warming potential impact than present emissions. Emissions in 100 years have no impact on the global warming of the coming century. I think that is quite obvious, quite clear and easy to understand. So the principle of dynamic LCA is to adjust the global warming potential of greenhouse gases emissions depending on its year of happening. If we take precisely what's on this graph, the decrease of the radiative forçage of greenhouse gases over time, we find that after 50 years, we are at about, we have a 0.58 factor to apply to an emission occurring at that date. That is to say that the global warming potential of 1 ton of CO2 emitted in 50 years is equivalent to 0.58 tons of CO2 emitted today. That's the general principle. So this method, this dynamic LCA, finally acknowledges temporary carbon storage in wood products. That is a great step forward. This method is included in this upcoming regulation as a simplified approach considering a linear decrease over 100 years of the global warming potential. So the discount factor at 50 years is 0.5. And if you do the same calculation as I did just before of the benefit of what happens with the biogenic carbon, we find that we have still this minus 1 ton of CO2 at the beginning of the life cycle. We have, after 50 years, which is the conventional duration of building, 50 years is the conventional duration for calculation of the life cycle assessment of building. At 50 years, we have 0.5 ton of CO2 emitted, so that the result is minus 0.5 ton of CO2. This is the benefit which is discounted from the sum of other greenhouse gases emissions happening during the life cycle of the product. That is the benefit of the carbon storage. So dynamic LCA is acknowledged in a number of standards and publications. I won't go through the details of that, but you have some data here, some indications here. And that's it for this methodological aspect. And I'd like now to conclude with the challenges for optimizing the effects of the whole system, forest and wood system. What we see is that as the climate issues become more pregnant, there are better prospects for a fair acknowledgement of forest and wood products assets. Still, there are a few challenges to consider in these in order to optimize these effects at the system level. You saw the importance of these forest carbon sinks, which are much larger than the product's carbon sinks. But their dynamics in time depends on many factors, some of which are difficult to manage, like, for example, climate-related risks. The product's sink can be strongly reinforced by market development policies, extension of storage through reuse and recycling. The substitution effect, you've seen that the order of magnitude is well, it's less than forest carbon sinks today, but it's still very significant, and they're an interesting lever for emissions reduction. And the important thing is that all reductions achieved this way are final. And my final remark would be just some kind of a warning or an attention point. It's that the decarbonation of the economy is on its way. So that means all the competing materials, the materials competing with wood, are doing their best to reduce their carbon footprint. And so the point is that wood products have also to lower their carbon intensity if they want to keep ahead from competing materials. I thank you very much for your attention and be pleased to answer any question.
Thank you, Gerard, for this very interesting demonstration with a lot of data. Yeah. I'm sorry, but I think we have only the time for one question, and there is one question. And this question, it's a question from the audience. Somebody is asking that, in fact, there is a balance between the process of photosynthesis in trees and the respiration of trees. So this person is considering that forest is not a sink because you have this balance. Dr. Senica will also answer later, but you can have an answer to this question.
Well, yes, thank you. I'm not a forester nor
Yeah.
an ecophysiologist or a biologist, but what do we see? I took the general figures of what is given for these carbon sinks, and in any case, a quite strong evidence is that
Sure.
we harvest wood, we take hydrocarbonated material from the forest, and this material includes carbon, which is coming from the atmosphere. So I think that in terms of balance, in mass balance, we have something quite clear in favor of the fact that this carbon is taken from the atmosphere.
Yes, and besides, trees are growing.
Yeah.
If trees are growing, they are taking carbon. Yeah, okay. So, thanks again, Gerard, for this.
I have, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
I've
you
raised
have a
my
question?
hand.
Yeah, please.
Is there time for a
Please,
question?
Peter.
I've
Yes.
very much enjoyed your talk, but I would like your opinion on the use of wood for biofuel. In the Netherlands and elsewhere in Europe, there's a very hot debate on the carbon non-neutrality of using wood pellets to use in power plants, and really being worse for climate than using fossil fuels, in fact, and with the side effect that we import in the European Union huge quantities of wood pellets from good forests in the southeastern United States, for instance. And it's now a problem also that Korea and Japan are planning to import the same volumes of very, very polluting and not carbon neutral wood pellets from these countries. What is your opinion?
Yeah, well, thank you for this question. I think it's I didn't want in the presentation to come into these quite controversial questions of general balance between accounting systems. What as a matter of fact, it's a system, as you mentioned. When you take wood from the forest at a certain rate, of course you have an effect on the carbon sink, on its dynamics at least. And there are very complicated modelization works in order to try to understand to answer this question, what is the equilibrium point between harvesting and obtaining the benefits of energy substitution, for example, or substitution in general, and the forest carbon sink. But I think every situation has to be looked carefully. It also depends on reference scenarios. That is the very, very important point. The reference scenario, if you consider that the best world would be a planet where man has not appeared or has disappeared, and the biomass is evolving on its way. If that is the reference scenario, then we are in trouble. of course.
Yeah.
But then the
True.
usual scenario, reference scenario, is the business as usual, and that is fair. And also then we come to very complicated modelization calculations, considering what is happening. That is the additionality issue. What is happening if we harvest more, if we intensify the forest management? And that's the interesting question. The work that we've done lately in France shows that, considering these additionality questions, whenever you intensify a forest in France, forest surface which is not managed previously, you still have an interesting benefit when you substitute, when you use wood for fuel, as far as you combine it with the material uses that are upcoming. If, of course, if you
Yeah.
only
Then
dedicate fully to fuel wood, then the balance is more questionable, of course.
Thank
But
you.
most
Thank
of the time, wood
Okay.
fuel is produced in parallel with material use of wood.
Thank you.
Yes.